Hello everyone, welcome back to freepilotgroundschool.ca. This is our fifth lesson on radio and electronic theory. We're just going to briefly discuss some other navigation aids. Here we have a steer. I will explain this silly joke in a moment. Let's first talk about the transponder. The transponder provides secondary radar information to air traffic control. They give you a code. In this case, you can see they've given a code of 0477. They see that code and their computer correlates that with your aircraft identification. And it tells air traffic control how high you are, where you are, your registration, how fast you're going. The transponder could be mode A, which is position only, or mode C, which is altitude and position. You put the 4-number squawk code into the transponder when assigned. So air traffic control will say something like Alpha Bravo Charlie squawk 4472. And then you would say squawk 4472 and type that in, or use the knobs to select that. There's an ident button, identification. You push that when ATC tells you to squawk ident, and it lights up your airplane on the radar. So that if there's a lot of traffic and they don't know which one is you, when there's a bunch of aircraft that are all in your kind of position, then they know. Here are 3 codes that you absolutely have to memorize, the emergency codes. You don't want to screw these up, and I'll tell you why. So first off, code 7500 is for a hijack, 7600 is a comm failure, and 7700 is an emergency. So as you can imagine, many people have screwed this up and they end up with a communications failure. But instead of squawking 7600, they can't remember and they squawk 7500. And air traffic control goes, oh, the reason they're not talking to us is because they're being hijacked. Well, we better send out the SWAT team. And then this person who just had a poor communications failure, minor emergency, ends up with a submachine gun pointed at his face because the police think that he's being hijacked. So memorize these, use the right ones if you run into an emergency, and don't screw them up. We talked about the emergency locator transmitter in an earlier lesson. It provides position to search and rescue. Can either be 121.5, which is the older versions, or 406, which are newer, that also transmit a position, a GPS position. You want to activate them on, even though they have an automatic auto feature as well, just in case it hasn't gone on. You always want to shut these off when removed from the aircraft. Let's say you put them in the car and you're driving along, they're still in auto mode, and you hit the brakes and it falls off your car and or off the seat in your car and onto the floor. Well, it registers an impact and activates. And I actually know somebody who had this happen to them and had the military search and rescue show up in the middle of the night at their house, wondering why there was a plane that perhaps crashed into their house. But if you do have an accident, you want to turn it on manually, just in case the G switch didn't activate. It's also the hard landings can activate this, but it'd have to be a really, really hard landing in order to activate this. And if you wanted to, you could, after landing, select 121.5 and listen on there and see if you activated it. But I think you'd have some structural damage if you did this. There's something called VHF direction finding, a DF steer. This is silly, but I found this when I Googled DF steer, and somebody made this silly meme. You can use it in an emergency if you're lost. You just call up air traffic control and ask them for a DF steer. Hopefully you're within range, and then they will have you key your mic buttons for 5 seconds and count to 5. And then just like you have an ADF in your aircraft going to an NDB, they can do the reverse and say, okay, this is your bearing, and they can tell you what heading to fly to get to their station. Lastly, we have aerodrome surveillance radar. This is a primary short-range radar that gives range and bearing information only, no altitude, and it will point out to air traffic control all the traffic. And so they can see on the radar, let's say a vehicle accidentally drives on the runway, they will see that. And let's say it's foggy out, plane's coming in to land. Oh, there's something on that runway, you need to get rid of it. So that's how ASR works, but you just need to be aware of it. Obviously, you don't need to know how to use that. That's for air traffic controllers. An ELT transmits on 121.5 or 406. VHF direction finding, so DF steer, is available from air traffic control when within VHF range. What frequency does the ELT transmit on? So 121.5, that's correct. B, 406, that's correct. C, none of the above. And D, A and or B, depending on the model. That's the correct answer. If you make a hard landing, you should A, call ATC and ask if they are receiving an ELT signal. B, listen on 121.5 for an ELT signal. So yeah, that's what you would want to do. C, rearm the ELT. D, call ATC and advise them of the inadvertent activation. So correct answer actually in this case is E. You're going to listen on 121.5 for a signal. If you hear it, you want to rearm it. So that means you shut it off and rearm it. That rearms the G switch for the next flight. And then you're going to call ATC and advise them that you accidentally set it off, just so they're not looking for you. That concludes this lesson on radio and electronic theory. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you in the next lesson, which is the review.